3 months after humanity's declaration of war, the galaxy began to understand what they had unleashed. The Zephyrian Empire, confident in their technological superiority and 3,000-year history of unchallenged dominance, had initially dismissed the human threat as the desperate posturing of a primitive species. They were learning how wrong they could be. Captain Jake Morrison gripped the command chair of the UES Retribution as the ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Around him, the bridge crew worked with the deadly efficiency that had become humanity's signature in this war. No wasted motion, no unnecessary communication, just focused professionals doing what humans did best: organized violence. "Contact," announced Lieutenant Kim at the sensor station. "Zephyrian Patrol Fleet, bearing 27 Mark IV, 3 heavy cruisers, escort formation." Morrison studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian ships were elegant works of art, their crystalline hulls catching and refracting the system's starlight into rainbow patterns. Each vessel was twice the size of his converted merchant cruiser and carried enough firepower to level a city. 6 months ago, the site would have sent any human ship fleeing for the nearest hyperspace jump point. Today, Morrison smiled. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Commence attack pattern Morrison 7. The space around the Retribution suddenly filled with ships as the rest of the human strike force dropped from hyperspace. 40 vessels materialized in perfect formation, their hulls bearing the scars and modifications that marked them as part of humanity's rapidly expanding war machine. The Zephyrians reacted with their typical arrogance. The lead cruiser, its captain no doubt confident in his technological superiority, turned to engage what appeared to be a suicidal attack by vastly inferior forces. It was the last mistake he would ever make. The human ships didn't behave like any enemy the Zephyrians had encountered before. Instead of engaging at long range, where superior Zephyrian technology would dominate, they closed the distance at maximum acceleration, absorbing devastating energy weapon fire that would have destroyed any normal fleet. But these weren't normal ships anymore. Human engineers had torn out everything unnecessary: crew quarters, recreational facilities, even life support for sections that didn't need it. The saved space and mass had been filled with armor, weapons, and most importantly, redundant systems that kept fighting even when primary systems were destroyed. The Retribution shuddered as a Zephyrian particle beam carved through her forward hull, but Morrison's ship kept coming. Behind the bridge, engineering crews were already sealing the breach and rerouting power. The ship's AI calculated damage and automatically adjusted tactics. "Ramming speed," Morrison ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. This was the tactic that had shocked the galaxy. Humans didn't just fight to win, they fought to inflict maximum damage even in defeat. Ships that were too damaged to continue fighting would aim themselves at enemy vessels and detonate their reactors. Crews would stay at their posts until the last second, ensuring maximum destructive impact. The Zephyrian captain, realizing his danger too late, tried to alter course, but human ships were smaller, more maneuverable, and crewed by beings who had no intention of surviving the encounter if it meant taking enemies with them. The collision tore both ships apart in a brief star that illuminated the entire battle. But the Retribution's sacrifice allowed 20 other human vessels to close with the remaining Zephyrian cruisers. What followed was butchery. Human weapons weren't as elegant as Zephyrian technology, but they were effective. Kinetic slugs fired from converted mining equipment punched through energy shields that had been designed to stop particle beams and plasma bolts. Nuclear warheads, crude but devastating, overwhelmed point defense systems meant to intercept more sophisticated missiles. Most shocking of all, human boarding parties armed with simple chemical explosives and personal weapons stormed Zephyrian ships, fighting through corridors with a ferocity that horrified their enemies. The crystalline beings had never encountered enemies who would continue fighting even after receiving wounds that should have been instantly fatal. Within 30 minutes, the engagement was over. 3 Zephyrian heavy cruisers had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The cost had been high. 22 human ships destroyed, over 3,000 crew members dead, but the strategic impact was enormous. News of the battle spread across both human and Zephyrian space with the speed of hyperwave communications. For humans, it was proof that their enemy could be defeated. For the Zephyrians, it was the first hint that they faced something unprecedented in their long history. Admiral Chen watched the battle reports from her command center on Luna, humanity's military headquarters since Earth had been deemed too valuable to risk in direct command operations. The holographic displays showed the current status of human forces across the galaxy, and what she saw both encouraged and terrified her. In 3 months, humanity had transformed from a minor spacefaring species into a war machine that consumed entire planets' industrial output. The numbers were staggering. Ship production up 2,000%, weapons manufacturing up 1,500%, military personnel increased from 2 million to 50 million. But the cost was equally staggering. Entire generations of young humans were being fed into the war machine. Families were separated across light years as colonists were evacuated from frontier worlds that couldn't be defended. The human economy had been completely reorganized around a single goal: killing Zephyrians. "Admiral," Dr. Rodriguez approached with her latest intelligence reports. "We're getting concerning data from our spies in neutral space. The Zephyrians are beginning to take us seriously." Chen studied the documents Rodriguez provided. For the first time since the war began, the Empire was mobilizing significant military resources specifically to deal with the human threat. Fleet movements suggested they were preparing for major offensive operations. "How long before they reach our core systems?" Chen asked. "Best estimate, 4 months. They're consolidating forces from across the Empire. When they move, it won't be patrol fleets we're facing. It'll be their main battle groups." The Admiral nodded grimly. The hit-and-run tactics that had served humanity well in the early months of the war wouldn't work against concentrated Zephyrian might. They needed something else, something that would even the odds against an enemy with overwhelming technological and numerical superiority. Her answer came from an unexpected source. "Admiral Chen," the voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Kim, head of the Prometheus Research Division. The physicist had been working on classified projects since the war began, but this was the first time she had requested a personal meeting with the Supreme Commander. "Dr. Kim, I trust you have good news for me." "I believe I do, Admiral. We've had a breakthrough in exotic matter manipulation. Project Lighthouse is ready for field testing." Chen raised an eyebrow. Project Lighthouse was humanity's most classified research program, so secret that only a handful of people knew it even existed. "Explain." Dr. Kim activated a holographic projector showing what appeared to be a modified human destroyer. "We've successfully weaponized artificial singularities. A single lighthouse-equipped vessel can generate a microscopic black hole and project it at near light speed toward enemy targets." The implications were staggering. "Weapon yield?" "Effectively unlimited, Admiral. The singularity will consume any matter it contacts, growing larger and more destructive until it either runs out of nearby mass or evaporates due to Hawking radiation. Against a Zephyrian fleet formation, a single shot could destroy dozens of ships." Chen studied the technical specifications. The weapon was dangerous beyond imagination. If something went wrong, it could potentially consume the ship that fired it, or even spread to nearby friendly vessels. But desperation bred innovation, and humanity was becoming very desperate. Side effects? The gravitational distortions will be visible across the galaxy. Every species with the technology to detect gravitational waves will know that someone has weaponized artificial singularities. There will be consequences. The Admiral considered this. Using such a weapon would mark humanity as a species willing to employ forces that could potentially threaten the stability of space itself. It would make them feared, but it would also make them targets for every other advanced civilization. How many vessels can you equip? We have components for 12 ships, Admiral. After that, we'll need at least 6 months to manufacture additional units. 12 shots. 12 chances to change the course of a war against an enemy that numbered their fleets in the millions. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. Do it, Chen ordered. Equip our most experienced crews and prepare for Operation Daybreak. As Dr. Kim left to implement her orders, Admiral Chen turned her attention back to the strategic displays. The Zephyrian Empire was vast, ancient, and powerful. But they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that humanity would fight like every other species they had encountered, rationally, with concern for casualties and long-term survival. They didn't understand that humans were capable of a type of warfare that prioritized victory over existence itself. The execution broadcast that had started this war was meant to demonstrate Zephyrian superiority and human helplessness. Instead, it had awakened something in the human spirit that the galaxy had never seen before, the willingness to burn down the entire universe rather than accept subjugation. Reports continued to flow in from across human space. The Mars shipyards had completed their expansion and were now producing one warship every 6 hours. The asteroid mining colonies had become vast weapons factories, their mass drivers hurling kinetic projectiles across interstellar distances. Even the agricultural worlds had been converted, their food production redirected to sustain the massive military expansion. But perhaps most importantly, humanity had discovered something about itself that had been hidden during the peaceful years of exploration and colonization. When faced with extinction, humans didn't just fight back. They fought with an intensity that transformed them into something their enemies couldn't comprehend. The Zephyrians had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years through technological superiority and careful manipulation of client species. They had never encountered an enemy willing to sacrifice everything for victory. They were about to learn what that meant. Admiral Chen activated the communications array, sending encrypted messages to every human commander across the galaxy. The orders were simple and terrifying. Prepare for total warfare. Hold nothing back. Show no mercy. The second phase of the war was about to begin, and humanity would either emerge victorious or take the galaxy down with them in their defeat. There would be no middle ground, no compromise, no peaceful resolution. The Zephyrians had wanted to demonstrate their power by executing human prisoners. They were about to discover the cost of teaching humanity to hate. The Battle of Zephyr Prime began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time on a Tuesday that would be remembered for the next 1,000 years. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, humanity's newest and most powerful warship, watching as the largest military fleet in human history dropped out of hyperspace around the Zephyrian capital system. 2 years of total war had transformed both civilizations beyond recognition. The Zephyrian Empire, once proud and confident in their technological superiority, now fought with the desperation of a dying dynasty. Their elegant crystal cities had been converted into fortress worlds, their art galleries turned into weapons factories, their peaceful merchant fleets replaced by armadas of war. But it was humanity that had changed the most. The fleet that materialized around Zephyr Prime bore little resemblance to the converted merchant ships and patrol vessels that had begun this war. These were purpose-built instruments of destruction, each one incorporating lessons learned from hundreds of battles and paid for with millions of human lives. "Fleet status report," Chen ordered, her voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of someone who had guided humanity through its darkest hour. 2,000 ships reporting ready for combat, Admiral," replied Captain Torres, her tactical officer. All lighthouse vessels are charged and ready. Ground forces are standing by for planetary assault. 2,000 ships. The number would have been impossible to imagine when the war began, but humanity's industrial capacity had grown beyond all rational limits. Entire star systems had been converted into factory complexes. Asteroid belts had been consumed to feed the insatiable hunger for raw materials. Even Earth's moon had been hollowed out and transformed into the largest shipyard in known space. The cost had been enormous. Humanity's pre-war population of 8 billion had been reduced to 6 billion, with entire generations lost to the war machine. But those who remained had been forged into something harder and more dangerous than any species the galaxy had ever produced. Zephyrian fleet movements? Chen asked. Their main battle fleet is taking defensive positions around the planet, Torres reported. Approximately 15,000 vessels, including their flagship, the Eternal Glory. They're not retreating, Admiral. They mean to make their final stand here. Chen nodded. The Zephyrians had learned too much about human tactics to simply run from this battle. They knew that humanity would pursue them to the edge of the galaxy if necessary. Better to fight with the advantages of prepared positions and planetary defense systems than to be hunted down piece by piece. Signal the fleet, Chen ordered. All vessels attack formation Omega. No quarter given, no prisoners taken. Today, we finish what they started. The response that echoed back from 2,000 ships was the same phrase that had become humanity's war cry. For the executed, for Earth, for humanity. The battle began with the deployment of humanity's newest weapon system. Project Lighthouse had evolved far beyond the experimental technology first tested 2 years ago. Now, 12 human vessels carried the power to reshape space itself. The UES Prometheus fired first. The artificial singularity formed at the ship's bow as exotic matter was compressed beyond the limits of normal physics. For a moment that lasted forever and no time at all, a point of absolute darkness existed where light itself could not escape. Then the gravitational weapon was released, streaking across space at near light speed toward the densest concentration of Zephyrian ships. The effect was apocalyptic. The first Zephyrian vessel simply vanished, consumed so quickly that its destruction registered on sensors only as a momentary gravitational anomaly. The second ship lasted fractionally longer before being pulled apart by tidal forces that no technology could resist. By the time the Zephyrian fleet began to react, 17 of their heavy cruisers had been reduced to their component atoms. But the Zephyrians had learned from previous encounters with lighthouse technology. Their fleet immediately dispersed, preventing the artificial singularity from consuming multiple targets. More importantly, they activated their own ultimate weapon. "Admiral," Torres called out, her voice tight with concern, "the Zephyrians are charging their planetary resonance cannon. If they fire that thing..." Chen knew the implications. The Zephyrian resonance cannon was a planet-based weapon system that could shatter moons and destabilize stars. It had never been fired in anger, but intelligence suggested it could destroy hundreds of ships with a single shot. "Time to charge completion?" 60 seconds, Admiral. Signal Lighthouse Squadron. Target the planetary cannon maximum intensity. The order went out, and 6 more artificial singularities formed in the void. But the Zephyrians had anticipated this response. Energy shields of unprecedented power surrounded their capital world, designed specifically to deflect or contain gravitational weapons. For 10 seconds, the outcome hung in balance as forces that could reshape reality itself warred around Zephyr Prime. Artificial black holes met energy barriers that drew power from the planet's core. Space itself seemed to buckle and twist as the fundamental forces of the universe were weaponized by 2 civilizations that had pushed beyond the bounds of sanity in their quest for victory. Then the barriers failed. The first artificial singularity to break through the shields struck Zephyr Prime's northern continent with the force of a collapsing star. Mountains were erased, oceans boiled away, The planet's crust cracked like an eggshell as gravitational forces tore through the world that had been the center of galactic civilization for 3 millennia. But the Zephyrians had one final surprise. As their homeworld died around them, the surviving members of the High Command activated a device that humanity's intelligence services had never suspected existed. Deep in the planet's core, massive antimatter charges detonated in sequence, adding the planet's own destruction to the gravitational chaos already consuming the system. Zephyr Prime didn't just die. It became a miniature supernova. "All ships, emergency jump!" Chen shouted over the alarms that suddenly filled the bridge. "Get us out of here now!" The explosion that followed was visible from neighboring star systems. When the light faded and space returned to something approaching normal, Zephyr Prime was gone. In its place, a new star burned where the Zephyrian homeworld had been, fed by exotic matter interactions that would continue for centuries. Of the 15,000 Zephyrian ships that had defended their capital, fewer than 100 survived. They scattered across the galaxy, carrying word of their empire's final defeat to the remaining Zephyrian worlds. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the Vengeance, watching the new star burn where an ancient civilization had chosen suicide over surrender. Around her, damage reports indicated that humanity had lost nearly half its fleet in the final explosion, but the strategic situation was clear. The Zephyrian Empire was finished. "Admiral," Dr. Rodriguez approached with the latest intelligence reports. "We're receiving surrender offers from 17 Zephyrian colony worlds. Their military commanders are requesting terms." "Terms?" Chen asked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Did they offer terms when they executed our people on live broadcast? Did they show mercy when they turned our colonies into slave worlds?" The question hung in the air as the full implications of humanity's victory began to sink in. They had defeated the most powerful empire in galactic history, but in doing so, they had revealed capabilities that terrified every other species in known space. Reports were already coming in from across the galaxy. Neutral worlds were closing their borders to human ships. Trade agreements were being canceled. Diplomatic missions were being recalled. The other species had watched humanity tear apart an empire that had ruled for millennia, and they were afraid. "What are your orders regarding the surrender requests?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. Admiral Chen considered the question. The logical response would be to accept surrenders, establish occupation governments, and begin the long process of rebuilding galactic civilization under human leadership. It would be the rational, civilized approach. But rationality and civilization had died with 12 women on a live broadcast 2 years ago. "Signal all Zephyrian military commanders," Chen ordered. "Unconditional surrender only. All military vessels to be destroyed, all weapons facilities to be dismantled, all surviving Zephyrian leadership to be turned over for war crimes trials." "Admiral," Rodriguez said carefully, "some of those worlds had nothing to do with the executions. Many of them opposed the High Command's decision to broadcast the killings. They were part of an empire that murdered our people for entertainment," Chen replied. "They benefited from a system built on the subjugation of younger species. Their opposition means nothing now." The orders went out across human space, carried by hyperwave transmissions to every fleet commander and colonial governor. The Zephyrian Empire would not simply be defeated. It would be dismantled piece by piece until nothing remained but scattered populations on isolated worlds, forever forbidden from rebuilding their lost power. But the real message was intended for the other species of the galaxy. Humanity had revealed itself as something new and terrifying. A civilization willing to employ weapons that could destabilize space itself, commanded by leaders who valued vengeance over mercy. The execution of 12 human prisoners had been meant to demonstrate humanity's weakness and the Zephyrian Empire's strength. Instead, it had awakened something that the galaxy had never seen before. 6 months later, Admiral Chen stood in the ruins of the Zephyrian High Command building on what had once been their administrative capital of New Crystalline. The elegant architecture lay in rubble around her feet, destroyed not by human weapons but by the Zephyrians themselves as they fled the advancing human forces. The war was over. The Zephyrian Empire was nothing but a memory. Humanity now controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy, with more systems joining the expanding Human Federation every day. But victory had come at a price that would echo through the centuries. "Admiral," Colonel Park approached with the final casualty reports. "Total human losses for the war: 2.3 billion military personnel, 400 million civilians. Industrial capacity reduced by 30% due to conversion losses. Colonial population displaced or relocated, 1.8 billion. Chen accepted the report without comment. The numbers were staggering, representing a generation of humanity that would never see peace, never know anything but war. But they had achieved something that no species in galactic history had ever accomplished: the complete destruction of a galactic empire. "What about the other species?" she asked. "They're calling it the Human War," Park replied. "Diplomatic contacts have been minimal. Most species are maintaining strict neutrality and avoiding human space entirely." Chen nodded. She had expected this response. Humanity's demonstration of gravitational weapons and their willingness to use them had marked them as something dangerous and unpredictable. The other species would watch and wait, hoping that humanity's aggressive expansion would eventually burn itself out. They were probably right to be afraid. "Admiral," a new voice interrupted her thoughts. Captain Torres approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. "We've received a priority message from the Prometheus Research Division. Dr. Kim says they've made another breakthrough." "What kind of breakthrough?" "She wouldn't say over standard channels, Admiral, but she's requesting immediate authorization for something called Project Genesis." Chen considered this. Every previous project from the Prometheus division had resulted in weapons of unprecedented destruction. She could only imagine what they had developed now that the immediate threat was over. "Authorization granted," she said finally, "but remind Dr. Kim that we're officially at peace now. Whatever she's building, it had better be for defense only." Torres saluted and departed, leaving Chen alone in the ruins of an empire. Around her, human engineers were already beginning the work of rebuilding, transforming Zephyrian technology to human specifications and human needs. The galaxy would remember this war for 1,000 years. They would remember the species that had been willing to weaponize gravity itself rather than accept subjugation. They would remember the empire that had ruled for 3 millennia, brought down in 2 years by beings who refused to acknowledge the concept of impossible odds. Most of all, they would remember the 12 human women whose execution had started a war that ended with the birth of humanity as the galaxy's newest superpower. Admiral Chen activated her personal communicator, sending a message that would be transmitted across human space and beyond to every species willing to listen. "To all civilizations of the galaxy," she began, her words carrying the authority of victory and the promise of consequences for those who might forget the lessons of this war. "Humanity has taken its place among the stars not through conquest, but through justice. We sought only peace, but when peace was denied to us, we chose war. When war was forced upon us, we chose victory." She paused, looking out at the stars that now belonged to humanity. "Let this serve as notice to all who would harm human beings anywhere in the galaxy. We are no longer a minor species seeking acceptance. We are humanity ascendant, and we have long memories." The message ended, but its implications would resonate throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The age of Zephyrian dominance was over. The age of humanity had begun.